Karl Hermann Frank stood before a wooden post on May 22, 1946, knowing the next few minutes would be his last. The crowd watched in silence as the rope tightened around his neck. This was justice for thousands of innocent lives he had destroyed. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me, and please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Karl Hermann Frank was born in 1898 in Karlsbad, a city that sat on the border between cultures, between languages, between two worlds that could never quite live together peacefully. From the moment he could understand the world around him, he heard one message repeated over and over. Your people are superior. Your language is the right one. Your blood makes you better than those around you. He grew up in a Sudetenland, where German families lived side by side with Czech families, and every day brought new tensions, new arguments, new reasons to hate your neighbor. Politicians stood on street corners and shouted about how Germans were being mistreated, how they deserved their own nation, how they should never have to answer to Czech authority. Young Karl listened to every word. E absorbe italiano. E believe italiano. He let it shape him into something cold and cruel. His first job was selling books in a small shop, handling paper and ink, talking to customers about stories and ideas. But books could not give him what he really wanted. Books could not give him power. So he turned to politics, to movements that promised strength through hatred, unity through exclusion. He joined groups that met in dark rooms and planned for a future where only certain people mattered. When the Nazi Party rose to power in Germany, Frank saw his opportunity. He joined without hesitation. He found a home among men who believed exactly what he believed, who wanted exactly what he wanted. Control, domination, the right to decide who lived and who died. In March 1939, everything changed. German tanks rolled across the border into Czechoslovakia. Soldiers marched through Prague. The government fell within hours. The world barely blinked. And Karl Hermann Frank, the former bookseller, suddenly found himself holding real power for the first time in his life. The Nazis created something they called the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, a fancy name for occupied territory, for a place where the conquerors made all the rules and the conquered had no choice but to obey. Frank was given the title of Secretary of State, but that was just the beginning. Soon after, he became the leader of the SSM police forces across the entire region. He controlled the Gestapo, the men in leather coats who knocked on doors in the middle of the night. He controlled the security services, the spies who listened to every conversation, who reported every whisper of resistance. He controlled the local police, turning neighbors into informers, friends into enemies. His voice became a constant presence on the radio, cold and threatening, always reminding people what would happen if they stepped out of line. He did not need to raise his voice. The calm tone made it worse somehow, made it clear that he was not angry, just certain that he had the power, certain that he would use it. People learned quickly what life under Frank meant. Arrests happened for no reason, or for reasons so small they seemed like dark jokes. A man could disappear for telling the wrong joke. A woman could vanish for refusing to smile at a German soldier. Families woke up to find their doors broken down, their loved ones dragged away into the night, never to return. Torture was not hidden. It was policy. Public executions were not rare. They were routine. Frank wanted everyone to see what happened to those who resisted, even in the smallest ways. Fear became the only law that mattered. Then came 1942, the year that would define Frank's legacy forever. A man named Reinhard Heydrich arrived in Prague as the new protector of Bohemia and Moravia. Heydrich was known across Europe as one of the most dangerous men in the Nazi regime, one of the architects of the Holocaust, a man who planned the murder of millions, with the same cold efficiency that others used to plan dinner parties. The Czech resistance, working with British intelligence, decided he had to die. They trained agents, prepared them for months, and sent them back to their homeland with one mission: kill Heydrich. On May 27, 1942, Czech fighters ambushed Heydrich's car in Prague. They threw a bomb. They opened fire. Heydrich was wounded critically. He died days later from his injuries. The resistance celebrated. They had struck a blow against the occupation. They had proven that the Nazis were not invincible, but they had also unleashed something terrible. The Nazi leadership in Berlin went into a rage. They demanded revenge, not just against the men who killed Heydrich, but against the entire Czech nation. And Karl Hermann Frank was more than happy to give them what they wanted. He coordinated a campaign of terror that would shock the world. The village of Lidis became the target. It was chosen almost at random, based on thin evidence that some villagers might have helped the resistance. On June 10, 1942, German forces surrounded Lidis. They separated the men from the women and children. Every male over the age of 15 was lined up and shot. 173 men and boys killed in a single day. The women, 184 of them, were sent to concentration camps. Most would never return. The children, 88 in total, were taken away. Some were killed immediately. Others were sent to camps or forced into German families. Their names changed, their identities erased. The village itself was destroyed. Every building burned. Every animal slaughtered. Even the cemetery was demolished. The graves dug up. The headstones smashed. The Nazis wanted to erase Leidas from existence, to make it as if the village had never been there at all. A few days later, another village called Lebeki suffered the same fate. Everyone murdered or deported. Everything destroyed. These were not military targets. These were not acts of war. These were massacres designed to send a message. Challenge us, and we will erase you from history. The years passed, but Frank never saw. He never questioned what he had done. Even in 1945, as the Nazi Empire crumbled, as Berlin was surrounded, as Hitler hid in his bunker, Frank continued to give orders. During the Prague Uprising in May 1945, as Czech citizens rose up against their occupiers, Frank commanded his troops to show no mercy. Shoot anyone who resists, burn buildings, kill civilians if necessary. When American and Soviet forces finally closed in, Frank tried to negotiate. He wanted to surrender to the Americans, hoping they would protect him from Czech justice. He knew what was waiting for him if the Czechs got their hands on him. But the Americans had no interest in protecting war criminals. They interrogated him briefly, then handed him over to Czechoslovak authorities. The moment the Czech people learned Frank was in custody, the streets filled with celebration and rage. Some people cried with relief. Others shouted for his blood. Everyone wanted the same thing: justice. The trial began quickly. The People's Court in Prague did not waste time. The charges were read aloud. War crimes, crimes against humanity, direct responsibility for the massacres at Leidas and Lebeki, years of systematic terror, torture, and murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents with his signature, orders he had personally given, recordings of his radio speeches, testimony from survivors who had lived through the hell he created. Frank sat through it all with a strange calm, as if he still believed he was untouchable, as if he still thought his power meant something. His defense was pathetic. He claimed he was just following orders from Berlin, that he had no choice, that he was simply doing his duty. The judges were not impressed. Following orders was not an excuse. He had made choices. He had signed the papers. He had given the commands. "E was guilty." The verdict came down without hesitation. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was death, but not by any ordinary method. Frank would die by pole hanging, a method reserved specifically for the worst Nazi war criminals. It was designed to be slow. It was designed to hurt. May 22nd, 1946. The morning arrived cold and gray. Frank was taken from his cell and led into the prison courtyard at Penn. Thousands of people watched, packed into the space, silent and waiting. Guards stood at attention, their faces blank. There was no traditional gallows, no platform, just a simple wooden post with a horizontal beam at the top. Pohenge worked differently than normal execution by hanging. There was no drop to break the neck, no quick end. Instead, the condemned person was slowly lifted into the air by a rope around their neck and left to strangle. Death came from asphyxiation, from minutes of struggling to breathe, from the slow crushing of the windpipe. It was not meant to be merciful. Frank was brought to the post. The rope was secured around his neck. He did not struggle. He did not plead. Perhaps he knew there was no point. Perhaps he had finally realized that his power was gone, that he was just another man about to die. Artisanal guards began to pull the rope, lifting him slowly off the ground. His feet kicked at the empty air. His body twisted. His face turned red, then purple. There were no screams, just the awful silence of a man choking to death in front of thousands of witnesses. Minutes passed. His movements became weaker. His body went limp, and then it was over. The rope was cut. The body was removed. The courtyard remained silent for a long moment, and then people began to leave. Slowly, quietly, as if waking from a nightmare. Karl Hermann Frank entered history, not as a hero, not as a leader, but as a symbol of cruelty, of what happens when hatred is given power, when ordinary men decide that some lives matter and others do not. His execution did not bring back the dead. It did not rebuild Leidas. It did not heal the wounds left by years of occupation. But it proved something important. No matter how powerful you become, no matter how untouchable you think you are, justice can still find you. It may take time, it may take years, but it will come. And when it does, all the power in the world cannot save you from what you have done.